What if the history of our world is not the simple linear story we've been told? What if the tale of humanity starting from primitive tribes, slowly learning to farm, then building cities, and finally rising into the modern age, is only a fraction of a much deeper and stranger reality? Across the globe, from every continent and culture, there are stories that hint at something far more complex. They speak of golden ages when humans walked with wisdom beyond our imagination, of sudden cataclysms that shattered the earth, and of forgotten civilizations swallowed by the sea or erased by fire. These are not just bedtime myths or religious parables. They are pieces of a much larger puzzle, one that could completely change how we understand our past, and maybe even our future. Think about it. Cultures separated by oceans, living thousands of years apart, all whisper the same haunting memories: floods that covered the land, nights when the sun disappeared, fire that rained from the skies. They talk about survivors, teachers, sages, and mysterious figures who appeared after the chaos to help rebuild. How can so many different voices across time echo the same story unless they are remembering something real? And if that is true, then the greatest question isn't whether these things happened. It's how much of that knowledge has been lost, buried beneath the ruins, or deliberately kept from us. Modern science keeps uncovering clues that refuse to fit into the official timeline. Ancient ruins lying deep under the oceans, monuments older than agriculture, built with techniques we still can't replicate, maps that seem to show the Earth before the ice sheets melted, evidence of sudden violent catastrophes matching the very myths scholars once dismissed as fantasy. It all points to one chilling possibility. We are not the first advanced civilization to walk this Earth. Others came before us, reached incredible heights, and then vanished almost without a trace. And if that is true, then we have to ask ourselves, why were they destroyed? And could the same fate be waiting for us? When we begin to peel back the layers of human history, one of the most striking discoveries is just how many ancient cultures, spread across the globe and separated by oceans, carried stories of beginnings marked by both wonder and catastrophe. These weren't quiet tales of gradual progress or simple origin myths. They were dramatic accounts of floods that covered entire continents, fires that scorched the skies, and strange beings who descended from the heavens or rose from the oceans to guide humanity. Strangely enough, these stories often appear in places where communication between cultures should have been impossible. Yet whether you travel to the jungles of Central America, the deserts of Mesopotamia, the mountains of Greece, or the islands of Polynesia, you'll find echoes of the same themes. It's as if every culture remembered a shared event, something so massive, so world-shaking, that no one could forget it. Take the story of the Sumerians, often credited as one of the earliest known civilizations. They told of a great flood that wiped out the world of men, leaving only a few survivors. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes how the gods decided to cleanse the earth, sending rains and storms that lasted for days, destroying everything. If that sounds familiar, it should, because the biblical story of Noah follows the same structure almost word for word. But Noah and Gilgamesh aren't the only ones. Indigenous tribes in North America speak of canoes tied to mountaintops as the waters rose. The ancient Hindus described Manu, the first man, who was warned of an oncoming flood and saved humanity by building a great boat. Even in faraway Polynesia, there are myths of the world being engulfed by rising seas. How is it possible that cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years all told the same kind of story? Was it coincidence, or were they all recording fragments of an actual global disaster that scarred the memory of mankind? Scientists today are beginning to realize these flood myths may not just be symbolic allegories. Geological evidence shows that around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, massive floods did occur. As the ice sheets melted, oceans rose dramatically, drowning vast coastlines. What's more chilling is the possibility that a sudden event, like fragments of a comet striking the ice sheets, may have accelerated this catastrophe. This is known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and though still debated, it lines up eerily well with the timing of the global flood myths. Imagine ancient people watching the sky as fireballs rained down, seeing the seas rise overnight, their cities and homelands swallowed forever. If that happened, of course they would have passed the story down. The trauma of such an event would be impossible to erase. But beyond the floods, there's another common thread in these beginnings: the sudden appearance of teachers, gods, or sages who arrive just after disaster strikes. In Mesopotamia, the figure of Ioannis rises from the waters to teach the survivors law, writing, and agriculture. In South America, Viracocha emerges after the flood to bring civilization back to the Andes. In Mesoamerica, the white-robed Quetzalcoatl is remembered as the one who gave people knowledge, astronomy, and architecture. These weren't just simple gods of thunder or fertility, these were culture bringers, described as walking among men, often depicted with human-like forms, sometimes even bearded, which stands out in cultures where beards weren't common. Were these stories pure invention, or could they represent memories of real individuals, survivors of a lost civilization who traveled the world, sharing what they knew with broken tribes struggling to rebuild? Then there's the unsettling consistency in how these myths frame the beginning of human history. Many of them suggest that we are not the first cycle of humanity, but rather one of several. The ancient Greeks described successive ages of mankind, the golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages, with each one ending in destruction. The Hindus preserved the idea of world ages called yugas, where civilization rises to greatness only to collapse and reset again and again. The Mayans too believed in cycles of creation and destruction, with multiple worlds having already ended before ours began. Even in the Bible, before the flood, there are cryptic hints of earlier beings, giants and men of renown who lived before the catastrophe. Could it be that these myths aren't describing mere fantasies, but an actual cycle of human history that stretches far beyond what we've been taught? If so, then our current civilization may not be the first advanced one, but simply the latest in a long pattern of rise, fall, and rebirth. Another clue lies in the strange sophistication embedded in some of the earliest known cultures. Take ancient Mesopotamia again, supposedly the cradle of civilization. Practically overnight, the Sumerians went from simple farmers to people who had writing, mathematics, astronomy, and complex law codes. Where did all of that knowledge come from? Historians often credit slow cultural evolution, but when you look closely, it feels more like someone flipped a switch. The same is true in Egypt, where dynastic civilization seems to spring out of nowhere, complete with hieroglyphs, monumental architecture, and advanced medical knowledge. In Mesoamerica, the Olmecs appear with colossal stone heads and sophisticated urban planning, yet little evidence of a long developmental period leading up to it. Could all of these sudden jumps be the result of knowledge being passed down from an earlier, now forgotten culture? When we talk about strange beginnings, we're really talking about the cracks in the official story, the moments where things don't add up, where myth and history overlap in ways too suspicious to ignore. Why does nearly every culture have a flood myth? Why do they speak of gods who look like men teaching civilization from scratch? Why do so many ancient traditions insist that the world has ended not once, but multiple times before? These questions force us to consider that our beginnings may not be as simple as textbooks suggest. Instead of a straight line of progress from stone tools to smartphones, human history may be a jagged path full of lost chapters, forgotten civilizations, and catastrophes that erased almost everything but left behind fragments of memory. And those fragments matter because they may not just tell us where we came from, but also where we're headed. If the cycle of rise and collapse is real, then perhaps our strange beginnings aren't just history, they're a warning. The myths that have survived for thousands of years may be humanity's way of shouting across time, telling us that what has happened before can happen again. And if we ignore them, we may find ourselves reliving the same story, standing on the edge of disaster, wondering how we missed the signs that were in front of us all along. When people think of lost civilizations, the first name that usually comes to mind is Atlantis. Thanks to Plato's dialogues, Atlantis has become the ultimate symbol of a vanished world, an advanced society wiped away in a single day and night of catastrophe. Skeptics dismiss it as allegory, a convenient parable about arrogance and decline. But the more we look, the harder it is to brush off the idea that Atlantis may not have been the only story of its kind. Around the world, legends tell of great nations swallowed by the sea, lands that thrived for generations before vanishing almost overnight. Some were remembered by name, like Lemuria in the Indian Ocean or Kumari Kandam in Tamil tradition. Others were reduced to whispers, sunken cities remembered only in fragments of myth. Yet, when modern science began uncovering ruins under the waves, the old legends suddenly seemed less like fantasy and more like distorted memories of real events. Take the ruins off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan. There, under the ocean, lies a massive stone structure with steps, terraces, and flat surfaces that look undeniably like man-made architecture. Some geologists argue it's a natural formation, but others point to its sharp right angles, pillars, and carved-like details that suggest human hands. If it is a ruin, then it predates much of known Japanese history, because the site has been underwater for at least 10,000. That would push it back to a time when mainstream historians insist there were only hunter-gatherers living in the region. Similarly, the ancient city of Dwarka in India, associated with the god Krishna, was long considered myth, until divers found ruins beneath the Arabian Sea. Walls, streets, and artifacts pulled from the depths suggest a thriving city that existed thousands of years before recorded Indian history. These discoveries force us to ask, how many more sunken cities lie beyond the reach of our current knowledge, hidden under oceans that rose dramatically after the last ice age? It isn't just the ocean floor that hides evidence of lost worlds. On dry land, monuments like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey turn our timeline upside down. This vast temple complex, with its towering carved pillars, has been dated to around 11,600 years ago, long before the supposed invention of agriculture. The official story of civilization says that farming had to come first, then cities, then temple. Yet here we find a temple older than farming itself, decorated with intricate carvings of animals and cosmic symbols. Who built it, and how did they organize the massive labor needed without a stable farming society? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe hints at an advanced group with knowledge and vision far beyond what archaeologists once thought possible for that era. Some researchers even suggest that Göbekli Tepe's builders could have been survivors of an earlier lost civilization, those who carried fragments of knowledge through the chaos of the Younger Dryas cataclysm and planted seeds of culture in a new world. Even older mysteries exist in scattered ruins around the globe. In South America, sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia defy explanation. Here, gigantic stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons were cut with near-machine precision, interlocking like puzzle pieces. Modern engineers admit that reproducing such stonework today would require advanced tools, yet Pumapunku is officially dated to a time when people supposedly had only copper chisels and ropes. The same can be said of Sacsayhuaman, where colossal walls of stone fit so tightly together that a knife blade cannot pass between them. How were these built? And more importantly, who passed down the techniques to achieve such perfection? One of the strangest aspects of these ruins is how often they don't fit into the narrative of the civilizations we credit for them. The Inca, for example, told the Spanish that they did not build many of the megalithic structures in Peru. They said they inherited them from earlier people. In Egypt, the Sphinx is likely far older than the pyramids that stand beside it, showing signs of water erosion that suggest it once stood in a much wetter climate, thousands of years before pharaonic Egypt began. In both cases, it seems that later civilizations moved into the ruins of earlier ones, adding to them, modifying them, but not creating them from scratch. If that is the case, then perhaps what we call the first civilizations were not truly the first, but only the survivors of something older, something that had already fallen. The evidence for lost civilizations also comes in the form of strange artifacts that don't fit their supposed era. Maps like the Piri Reis chart from the 1500s show the coastlines of South America and even parts of Antarctica with uncanny accuracy, features that were supposedly unknown at the time. How did a Renaissance mapmaker copy details that could only have been charted before the land was covered in ice? The implication is that the Piri Reis map wasn't original, but a copy of far older sources, passed down through time from a forgotten age of explorers who had already mapped the globe. Other examples include precision-carved vases found in Egypt, metallic artifacts discovered in layers of rock far older than human history, and depictions of flying machines and advanced technology in ancient texts. While mainstream archaeology dismisses many of these as mistakes or hoaxes, the sheer number of anomalies is hard to ignore. What's most telling is the consistency of the myths. The story of Atlantis, for instance, speaks of a mighty nation that became arrogant, challenged the gods, and was destroyed in a single night. Across the world we hear the same pattern: civilizations rising to great heights, angering divine forces or upsetting the balance of nature, and then being wiped out by floods, fire, or earthquakes. These stories may carry symbolic lessons, but their repetition suggests they're grounded in real memories of destruction. Survivors told their descendants, who told theirs, until the details blurred into legend. Yet behind every legend is a kernel of truth. And in this case, The truth might be that humanity has risen to greatness before, only to fall back into near oblivion. If we accept the possibility of lost civilizations, then the question becomes, how much of their knowledge survived? Was it passed down in fragments to cultures like the Sumerians and Egyptians, who suddenly appeared with writing, mathematics, and astronomy? Was it embedded in myths about gods and sages, encoded in stories so they would outlast memory? Or was it hidden in megalithic monuments, aligned with stars and solstices, waiting for future generations to rediscover their meaning? Whatever the case, the signs are there, scattered across the earth like breadcrumbs leading back to a forgotten age. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that our timeline of history is incomplete. We are told that civilization is only about 6,000 years old, but the ruins, myths, and anomalies point to something far older, something that challenges the very foundation of how we understand our place in time. If there were civilizations before us, advanced enough to build monuments that still defy explanation, then their disappearance should serve as both a warning and a revelation. They remind us that greatness does not guarantee survival, and that the earth itself can erase even the mightiest nations. Perhaps Atlantis, Lemuria, and the rest were not just myths, but cautionary tales written into the memory of mankind. Tales meant to remind us that pride comes before the fall, that nature is stronger than any empire, and that forgetting the past leaves us doomed to repeat it. In the ruins beneath the waves, in the stones that stand against all odds, the lost civilizations may still be speaking to us. The question is whether we're listening, or whether we're destined to follow them into the silence of history. When we turn our attention to the oceans, we step into perhaps the most mysterious realm of human history. The sea has always been a boundary between worlds, between what we can know and what lies hidden beneath the waves. And it's not just the mystery of its vastness. The oceans are time capsules, holding within them entire landscapes swallowed at the end of the last ice age, when rising waters consumed vast stretches of land where people once lived. Imagine this. 12,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, coastlines were hundreds of miles further out. Areas that are now deep underwater were once fertile plains where humans hunted, built, and thrived. Then almost overnight in geological terms, the ice sheets melted, and the seas surged upward. Any cities, temples, or monuments that might have existed on those coasts were drowned. This means that if we truly want to find the missing chapters of human history, we cannot just dig in deserts or climb mountains. We have to look under the oceans. And when explorers have done so, the discoveries have been startling. Take the Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan. At first glance, it looks like a giant staircase descending into the sea, with flat platforms, sharp right angles, and geometric patterns that seem impossible to explain as natural formations. Divers who have studied Yonaguni describe what looks like walls, pillars, and even carvings etched into the stone. Mainstream geologists often dismiss it as a natural structure shaped by tectonic activity, but the sheer precision of some of the features has left others convinced it's the remains of a lost city. What makes it even more intriguing is that Yonaguni lies in an area that would have been above sea level before the end of the last ice age. If it truly was built by human hands, then its origins stretch back to a time when, according to official history, humans were still supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. That contradiction alone should force us to rethink what we know about our ancestors. Then there's Dwarka, off the coast of India. Long described in Hindu scriptures as the legendary city of Lord Krishna, Dwarka was thought to be a myth, just a spiritual allegory. But when divers began exploring the Gulf of Kambat, they found submerged ruins stretching over miles of seabed. Massive stone walls, streets, and even artifacts like pottery and human remains have been recovered dating back thousands of years. Some estimates push its origins to 9,000 years ago, long before the Indus Valley civilization. If true, this would rewrite Indian history entirely, and perhaps world history as well, because it suggests organized urban societies existed far earlier than we've been taught. Isn't it curious how myths dismissed as fantasy often lead us straight to the evidence we weren't supposed to find? Far across the world, in the Bahamas, lies another enigma, the Bimini Road. Beneath the clear waters near Bimini Island, divers discovered a massive pathway of limestone blocks laid out in a near-perfect line, stretching for half a mile. Some believe it to be the remains of an ancient harbour or wall. Others insist it's simply natural beach rock fractured by erosion. Yet its striking arrangement, massive blocks that look deliberately placed, has kept speculation alive for decades. What makes it especially fascinating is that it was discovered in the 1960s, right after Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, predicted that remnants of Atlantis would be found near Bimini around that very time. Was it coincidence? Or did Cayce tap into something we don't understand? Regardless, the Bimini Road continues to provoke debate, and if it does turn out to be man-made, it would represent yet another piece of evidence for a civilization older than we admit. These aren't isolated cases. From the sunken temples of Mahabalipuram in India, where local fishermen long spoke of 7 pagodas beneath the sea until ruins were indeed found, to the ancient structures off the coast of Cuba detected by sonar, massive blocks resembling pyramids, resting 600 meters below the surface, there are countless underwater enigmas waiting to be explained. Each discovery seems to echo the same story. Advanced societies once thrived along coastlines now drowned, and when the seas rose, their cities were lost to time. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of these underwater mysteries is how they connect to the flood myths we explored earlier. Nearly every culture tells of rising waters swallowing the world, forcing survivors to flee to higher ground. For years, scholars treated these as symbolic tales of seasonal flooding. But when we dive beneath the waves and find actual cities lying in silence on the seabed, the line between myth and history begins to blur. Could it be that the flood stories aren't exaggerations at all, but accurate memories of when oceans swallowed whole civilizations? Imagine living in a thriving coastal city only to see the horizon darken as the seas rushed in, claiming everything you knew. That trauma would never be forgotten. It would become legend, passed from one generation to the next, until the legend became myth, and the myth became dismissed by scholars who never set foot beneath the ocean. There's another dimension to this mystery. Why so many of these submerged sites appear to be older than accepted history allows. Official archaeology insists that complex societies only emerged around 6,000 years ago, yet sites like Diwaka or Yonaguni push back that timeline by thousands of years. If they are real, then it means that organized civilizations existed before the Ice Age ended, which suggests that the rise of humanity has been far less linear than we imagine. Maybe we didn't climb steadily upward from caves to skyscrapers. Maybe we rose, fell, and rose again, with the sea erasing each chapter before we could write it down. And here's the unsettling thought. We've only explored a tiny fraction of the ocean floor. Estimates say less than 20% has been properly mapped, and far less studied in detail. That leaves vast expanses where who knows how many lost cities might lie buried in silence. For every Yonaguni or Dwaka we've discovered, there could be dozens more hidden beyond the reach of divers, waiting in the dark. What if the true history of humanity lies out there beneath miles of salt water, preserved but forgotten? What if the answers to who we are and where we came from have been sitting under the waves this whole time? The ocean doesn't just hold mysteries of geography, it also holds mysteries of intention. Some of the submerged sites appear deliberately placed or aligned, as if their builders wanted them to carry a message. Were they merely cities swallowed by chance, or were they monuments designed to last, even beneath the waves, so that future generations might find them? If the builders of these sites knew a catastrophe was coming, if they knew the seas would rise, perhaps they built in stone so their story would not vanish. That possibility is both chilling and awe-inspiring, because it suggests they weren't just victims of disaster, but conscious participants in a cycle they understood far better than we do. The secrets beneath the waves remind us that the past is not settled. Our textbooks may tell us one story, but the ocean whispers another, a story of civilizations that thrived, vanished, and left behind fragments just beyond our reach. The more we search, the more we uncover hints that our history is not as young as we think, and that the ocean is not just a barrier, but a library of lost chapters. The question is, are we willing to dive deep enough to find them? Because if we do, we may discover that the myths of sunken cities and drowned worlds were never myths at all. They were the truth, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to listen. When we think of the stars, we often imagine them as symbols of wonder, inspiration, or destiny. But for ancient people, the stars were not just decoration in the night sky. They were guides, clocks, calendars, and perhaps even something more, a key to knowledge we still don't fully understand. The farther back we look, the more we see that early civilizations had an astonishing grasp of astronomy, geometry, and cosmic alignment. What makes it so strange is that this knowledge appears suddenly, without a clear path of development. as if it was inherited rather than discovered. Even today, with our technology, we struggle to explain how ancient builders achieved such precise astronomical alignments. And if their knowledge of the heavens came from careful observation alone, how did it reach levels that rival and sometimes surpass our modern ability? The possibility that they were recording memories of a much older tradition, perhaps from a civilization now lost, becomes harder to ignore. Take the Great Pyramids of Giza, for example. These monumental structures are not just piles of stone, they are precisely aligned with the cardinal directions, so precisely that even with advanced instruments it would be difficult to replicate today. More astonishingly, the three pyramids are arranged in a pattern that mirrors the stars of Orion's belt. The correlation isn't vague. The offset of the smallest pyramid matches the offset of the smallest star, and the alignment lines up with where Orion would have appeared in the sky around. Why would the builders of Giza, supposedly existing around 200 and 500 BC, design monuments that reflect the sky as it appeared thousands of years earlier? Was this coincidence, or were they encoding knowledge of a much older age passed down through generations, remembering a time when Orion had special significance? And Egypt isn't the only place where this mystery appears. In South America, at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, structures are aligned with solstices and equinoxes, so precisely that they seem more like observatories than mere temples. At Chichen Itza in Mexico, the Pyramid of El Castillo is built so that on the spring and autumn equinoxes, shadows form the shape of a serpent slithering down its steps, an effect that requires extraordinary astronomical understanding. The Mayans, in fact, tracked Venus with such precision that their calculations of its movements are nearly identical to modern measurements. Yet we are told they had no telescopes, no advanced instruments. How did they achieve this level of accuracy? Then there's Stonehenge in England, often thought of as just a circle of stones, but in truth, a complex astronomical calculator. The stones are aligned to mark the solstices, and the entire site functions as a way to predict eclipses and lunar cycles. This required not just casual skywatching, but generations of careful data collection and sophisticated math. If spent 7,000 years ago, to the megaliths of Armenia at Karahunj, which some call the world's first observatory, the pattern is undeniable. Across cultures, across continents, ancient people were obsessed with the sky and built monuments to track it with uncanny precision. Perhaps the most controversial evidence of ancient knowledge of the stars comes from old maps and records. The Piri Reis map, created in 1513, shows coastlines of South America and even Antarctica with surprising accuracy. What's extraordinary is that Antarctica is depicted without ice, something that would only have been true over 6,000 years ago. Historians claim Piri Reis compiled his map from earlier sources, which means someone, at some point in the distant past, had already mapped the world. Who could have done this, and how, when according to the official story no civilization at the time had the ability to sail across oceans, let alone chart coastlines with such detail? If the knowledge came from a forgotten age of seafarers, then we may be glimpsing the remnants of a global civilization erased by cataclysm. The Dogon tribe of Mali in Africa adds another layer to the mystery. For centuries they preserved detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including the existence of Sirius B, a faint dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, only discovered by modern telescopes in the 19th. How did they know this? Scholars claim it was introduced later by outside contact, but the Dogon insist it was part of their ancient traditions, passed down from sky beings who visited long ago. Whether literal or symbolic, the accuracy of their knowledge is chilling. If ancient cultures could somehow know what only advanced astronomy has confirmed in recent centuries, it suggests that their understanding of the stars was far deeper than we're comfortable admitting. This obsession with the heavens wasn't only practical, it was spiritual. Ancient texts often speak of gods descending from the sky, of cosmic battles, of destinies written in the stars. To the Sumerians, the heavens were home to the Anunnaki, powerful beings whose arrival shaped human civilization. In Mesoamerica, the gods were often depicted as descending from celestial realms, their power tied directly to Venus, the Sun, or the Milky Way. Even in the Bible, the Book of Job and other passages describe constellations with reverence, suggesting that the ancients didn't just observe the sky, they saw it as the blueprint of creation itself. Were these stories metaphors, or could they be encoded memories of real events, preserved in myths so they wouldn't be forgotten? Another strange clue comes from how often ancient monuments are aligned with points not just on Earth, but in the sky. The Nazca lines in Peru stretch for miles, massive geoglyphs only visible from above, depicting animals, geometric shapes, and straight lines pointing to celestial events? Were they astronomical calendars, or landing strips for something more otherworldly? Mainstream archaeology insists they were ritual pathways, but their scale and precision suggest something beyond simple ceremonies. Similarly, the alignments at Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirror the constellation of Draco, just as the pyramids of Giza mirror Orion. These parallels hint at a pattern. Ancient builders weren't just constructing cities, they were creating earthly reflections of the heavens, as if to connect their world with the cosmos. What makes all of this so compelling is the sheer global consistency. Civilizations separated by oceans, supposedly unaware of each other's existence, all demonstrated the same obsession with the stars and built with the same kind of cosmic precision. This isn't the result of random chance. It suggests either a shared origin of knowledge or contact between cultures we've been told never interacted. Could it be that survivors of a lost civilization carried this cosmic wisdom across the world, rebuilding after disaster, teaching scattered tribes to align their temples and pyramids with the heavens? Or perhaps these cultures were independently trying to remember something even older, an understanding that the sky itself holds the key to our survival. The knowledge of the stars wasn't just about timekeeping, it may have been about warnings. Many ancient myths tie celestial events to destruction: comets, falling stars, or battles among the gods in the heavens. If the Younger Dryas impact did devastate the earth with fire from the sky, then it's possible ancient cultures encoded astronomical knowledge as a way to remember and prepare. By building monuments aligned with cycles of the heavens, they may have been reminding future generations to keep watch, to never forget the dangers above. The truth is, we still don't know how much the ancients understood. Were they simply master observers, patient and meticulous in ways we struggle to imagine, or did they inherit fragments of knowledge from a civilization wiped out by catastrophe? Knowledge they couldn't fully replicate but preserved in stone. Either way, their mastery of the stars remains one of the greatest mysteries of human history. The monuments still stand, pointing silently to the sky, as if urging us to look up and remember what they once knew. Maybe, just maybe, the heavens they charted weren't only about the past, they were about the future too. When we think about human achievement, our modern cities, towering skyscrapers and massive machines often come to mind as symbols of progress. Yet, when we look at the relics left behind by ancient civilizations, we encounter structures so staggering, so inexplicable, that they defy the limits of what we believe those societies were capable of. These are the monuments that stand as eternal puzzles: the pyramids, the megaliths, the cyclopean walls, the sites carved with precision that rivals machine tools. The strange truth is that many of these works of stone are not only feats of engineering, but also riddles that shake the foundations of history. Were these truly the works of primitive people using copper chisels and wooden sledges, or do they represent remnants of knowledge that has been lost to us, fragments of a technology or understanding that belonged to a forgotten chapter of human history? Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most iconic structure on Earth. Standing for over 4,000 years, it was, until modern times, the tallest human-made structure in the world. Its precision is mind-bending. The base is almost perfectly square, with an error margin of mere inches across a span of more than 750 feet. The alignment to true north is within a fraction of a degree, something we struggle to replicate even with advanced surveying equipment. Inside, the chambers are aligned with incredible precision, and the stones, some weighing more than 80 tons, were transported from quarries hundreds of miles away. Egyptologists insist it was all done with ropes, ramps, and sheer manpower, but no demonstration has ever shown how such feats could be achieved on that scale. Even today, engineers debate how long it would take to replicate such a project. Even with cranes and modern machinery, the sheer logistics suggest knowledge of engineering and mathematics far beyond what is credited to the builders. But Giza is only one example. Look at Baalbek in Lebanon, where colossal stones, the trilithon, rest in the foundations of an ancient temple. These stones weigh up to 1,200 tons each. To put that in perspective, that's more than double the heaviest blocks used in the Great Pyramid. Even with today's technology, moving and positioning stones of that size would be nearly impossible. Yet somehow ancient builders lifted and placed them with uncanny precision. Was this sheer brute force, or did they possess methods of transport and lifting that we've long forgotten? Some theorists suggest they may have harnessed principles of sound or magnetism Technologies that sound like science fiction but have roots in ancient myths about the songs of the stones and floating blocks. Across the ocean in South America, at sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the walls are made of massive stones cut with such accuracy that they fit together without mortar, their edges locking in irregular yet perfect shapes. Some of these stones are so tightly joined that not even a blade of grass can slide between them. How could this level of precision have been achieved with the supposed tools of the time, stone hammers and bronze chisels? The stones are not small either. Many weigh dozens of tons and were dragged up steep hillsides before being set in place. Similar feats appear at Pumapunku in Bolivia, where H-shaped stones have been carved with machine-like perfection, featuring straight grooves, drilled holes, and right angles that suggest the use of advanced tools. Archaeologists attribute it to hand tools, but the level of precision is so that it raises the question, were these really carved by hand, or by technology we no longer understand? In places like Easter Island, the mystery takes on a different form. The Moai statues, some weighing over 80 tons, were carved and transported across the island's rugged terrain. The local legend says the statues walked to their positions, which archaeologists interpret as a metaphor for clever transportation techniques. But could it also hint at knowledge of balance, leverage, or even energy manipulation lost to time? After all, how do you move such gigantic figures across miles without modern equipment? Each of these mysteries adds another piece to the puzzle, suggesting that ancient builders had methods and insights we can't replicate today. It's not only the size of the stones, but the purpose of the structures that raises questions. Many of these monuments are aligned with celestial events, as if combining architecture with astronomy. The Great Pyramid's shafts point to Orion's belt and Sirius. Stonehenge aligns with solstices. The temples of Angkor Wat mirror the constellations. These weren't just structures to honor gods, they were complex machines of stone, blending architecture, mathematics, and cosmology. Were they temples, observatories, power stations, or all three? The possibility that these monuments had functions beyond what we assume, perhaps even tapping into energy from the earth or the heavens, remains an open question. What's especially compelling is how widespread these impossible feats are. From Egypt to Peru, from Easter Island to Lebanon, the same patterns emerge: stones so large they defy explanation, precision so advanced it borders on the impossible, and alignment so accurate they suggest a shared obsession with the stars. How could cultures separated by oceans, supposedly without contact, achieve such similar feats? Either they all stumbled upon the same techniques independently, or there was a common source of knowledge, a lost civilization that passed down its secrets, leaving its fingerprints on monuments across the globe. Mainstream archaeology often dismisses these mysteries as exaggerations or insists that brute labor explains it all. But when we actually examine the scale of these constructions, the official story becomes harder to swallow. Moving multi-ton stones up mountains, aligning them to astronomical events, cutting them with precision that rivals machines, these are not the works of people fumbling in the dark. These are the works of people who knew exactly what they were doing and who had access to knowledge we underestimate. If they were truly as primitive as we're told, then we must ask, why do we, with all our machines, struggle to explain or replicate what they achieved thousands of years ago? Perhaps the most haunting question is not how they built these monuments, but why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to build with stones weighing hundreds of tons, when smaller stones would have sufficed? Why align structures so carefully with the heavens unless it was crucial? Why encode mathematics, astronomy, and geometry into temples and pyramids unless it served a higher purpose? These choices suggest intent, knowledge, and a vision that went beyond simple worship or burial. They suggest the builders were sending messages through time, preserving knowledge in a medium that would last long after they were gone. Stone endures, even when books burn and civilizations fall. Perhaps they built in stone because they knew catastrophe was coming, and they wanted something to survive, something that would whisper to the future, "We were here, and we knew more than you think." The builders of the impossible leave us with two choices. Either we dismiss them as anomalies, chalking up the mysteries to coincidence, brute force, and imagination, or we admit that they point to something bigger, an untold chapter of human history, a forgotten age of knowledge that reached heights we can scarcely imagine. If the latter is true, then every massive stone, every aligned monument, every inexplicable carving is not just a relic, but a clue. Together they tell a story of a world we no longer remember, a story of people who built the impossible, only to vanish into the silence of history. And if their monuments remain, still defying explanation, then perhaps they are waiting for us to finally understand what they were trying to tell us. Throughout history, there are whispers of teachers who appeared suddenly, shared wisdom far beyond the time in which they lived, and then vanished as mysteriously as they came. These are not just religious prophets or kings, but figures described in countless cultures as bringers of knowledge, individuals or beings who taught humanity the skills that became the foundations of civilization. Strangely enough, these stories don't appear in just one part of the world. From Mesopotamia to the Andes, from Egypt to Polynesia, tales of wise instructors echo across time, often with uncanny similarities. The question that lingers is simple: who were they? And how did they know so much? Were they merely gifted humans ahead of their time, survivors of an earlier advanced society, or something even more extraordinary? One of the most famous examples is the legend of the Sumerian gods, known as the Anunnaki. According to ancient Mesopotamian texts, these beings descended from the heavens and gifted early humans with knowledge of writing, mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture. They weren't described as ordinary humans, but as powerful entities who shaped civilization. Some take these accounts literally, speculating about extraterrestrial involvement, while others believe they may symbolize survivors of a lost advanced culture, passing their knowledge to less developed societies. Either way, the fact that some of the earliest written records we possess talk about teachers from the skies cannot be ignored. Why would the very first civilizations emphasize such stories unless they were rooted in some profound reality? In South America, similar accounts arise in the myths of Viracocha, the bearded teacher god who arrived after a great flood and traveled among the Andean people, teaching them agriculture, architecture, and law. What's curious is how he is often described as having a foreign appearance, tall, with features that didn't match the local population. He was said to have the power to control nature, even stopping floods or commanding the sun. And once his work was done, he left, promising to return one day. The story resonates with countless traditions around the globe, where teacher figures arrive after catastrophe, bring knowledge, and disappear again. Egypt has its own mysterious teacher figure, Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and measurement. While mythologized as a deity with the head of an ibis, many scholars argue he may have represented a real individual or a group of individuals who introduced writing, mathematics, and sacred geometry to the Nile Valley. The emerald tablets of Thoth, though their origins are controversial, speak of hidden knowledge passed down through the ages, guarded by those deemed worthy. Were these simply allegories for intellectual traditions, or fragments of something deeper, records of knowledge inherited from an earlier forgotten age? In Polynesian traditions, there are tales of culture heroes who crossed the seas and taught islanders navigation, farming, and social organization. These figures were often depicted as outsiders who appeared mysteriously and guided the people before vanishing. The same goes for Native American legends, where figures like the Hopi's Marsaw provided laws and ways to live in harmony with the earth after devastating calamities. The consistency of these patterns is too striking to dismiss as coincidence. What unites all these myths is not only the idea of teachers, but the timing of their appearance. Again and again they emerge after great destruction, floods, fires, or collapses that reset human society. It's as though survivors of an earlier advanced civilization, having seen their world destroyed, travelled among the remnants of humanity to seed knowledge and ensure it wasn't completely lost. If this is the case, then the forgotten teachers were not gods in the divine sense, but guardians of memory, preserving fragments of technology and wisdom that would otherwise have vanished. But there's another possibility, one even more mysterious. What if these teachers weren't survivors of a lost civilization but visitors from elsewhere? As many ancient astronaut theorists propose, the descriptions of beings descending from the skies, of glowing or radiant appearances, of powers that defied natural explanation. These sound eerily similar to modern accounts of extraterrestrial contact. Could the forgotten teachers have been emissaries from another world, arriving at crucial moments in human history to steer us toward progress? Skeptics dismiss this idea as fantasy, but the sheer repetition of the motif across continents separated by oceans gives it weight. Were it only one culture that spoke of teachers from the heavens, we could dismiss it as myth. But when the same themes appear in Mesopotamia, Egypt, South America, Polynesia, and beyond, we must ask ourselves why. Let's not overlook the symbolism that surrounds these figures either. Many are associated with serpents or feathers, symbols often linked to wisdom and cosmic knowledge. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of Mesoamerica, is a prime example. Like Viracocha, he arrived to bring civilization, and then left with a promise to return. The serpent is also linked to the Kundalini energy of Eastern traditions, to DNA in modern interpretations, and to the Ouroboros in alchemy, a universal symbol of cycles and eternity. Did the teachers deliberately cloak their knowledge in symbols, knowing that literal descriptions would be misunderstood or lost? Or were the symbols themselves a code, meant to survive the erosion of time and language? The forgotten teachers also raise a troubling question. If they were real, why did they disappear? If they possessed the knowledge to guide humanity, why not stay and ensure progress continued uninterrupted? Perhaps their mission was limited, meant only to nudge humanity forward rather than carry us all the way. Or perhaps their disappearance wasn't voluntary. If they were survivors of a lost world, they may have eventually died out. If they were visitors, maybe they withdrew once their task was complete, or once humans began to misuse the gifts they had been given. After all, many myths also contain warnings. Knowledge can uplift, but it can also destroy. The legend of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and being punished serves as a reminder of this double-edged truth. Could it be that the forgotten teachers left because they feared humanity wasn't ready for more? What makes these stories compelling is not just the myths themselves, but the traces of knowledge they left behind. Advanced astronomy in ancient Sumer, megalithic structures aligned to the stars, precise calendars in Mesoamerica, and the mysterious capabilities of navigation and agriculture that appear suddenly rather than gradually. These are fingerprints of teachers who had insights beyond their time. Archaeologists often brush these anomalies aside, insisting that human ingenuity alone explains the sudden leaps. But the timing, the consistency, and the symbolism suggest otherwise. Humanity may be inventive, but history usually shows slow, incremental growth. What we see in the ancient record looks more like sudden bursts of advancement, as though knowledge was injected rather than developed. The legacy of the forgotten teachers is everywhere. It's in the myths of gods descending from the skies. It's in the temples built with knowledge of geometry and astronomy. It's in the agricultural revolutions that appeared suddenly in multiple parts of the world, and perhaps it's even encoded in the stories of floods, cataclysms, and cycles of destruction and renewal that nearly every culture remembers. These stories are not random. They are the faint echoes of a time when humanity was guided by hands we no longer see. The most unsettling thought is that if these teachers existed, their story is not finished. Many traditions say they will return, whether as gods, saviors, or bringers of a new cycle. Some see this as prophecy, others as metaphor. But the idea persists. Humanity has not been abandoned forever. If they came once after great destruction, might they come again? If catastrophe strikes our world, the forgotten teachers may not be so forgotten after all. They may simply be waiting for the right moment to step back into history. If there is one theme that echoes across nearly every ancient tradition, it is the idea that knowledge was never freely available to all. Instead, wisdom was guarded, preserved, and passed down only to those considered worthy. This idea of guardianship appears in countless cultures, suggesting that humanity's most important secrets about the earth, the heavens, and even ourselves were carefully hidden from the masses. Why? Perhaps because this knowledge was seen as too powerful, too dangerous, or simply too sacred to be placed in careless hands. These guardians of knowledge, whether priests, initiates, or mysterious brotherhoods, appear again and again in history, holding fragments of truth that hint at a forgotten world. Take ancient Egypt, for instance. The priests of Heliopolis and Thebes were not merely religious leaders, they were custodians of scientific and astronomical knowledge. They encoded their wisdom in myths and temple rituals, ensuring that only initiates who underwent years of training could access the deeper truths. Even the construction of the pyramids and temples seems to hide information, as though the stones themselves were repositories of coded messages. The alignments of monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and star systems are too precise to be accidental. They tell us that these guardians were not simply priests performing empty rituals, but mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers safeguarding knowledge through architecture and symbolism. In Greece, the same tradition emerges with the mystery schools, such as those at Eleusis, or dedicated to Orpheus. Only the initiated were permitted to know the full rites, and secrecy was enforced under penalty of death. What could have been so profound that it had to be hidden with such intensity. Some scholars believe these rituals involved altered states of consciousness and symbolic reenactments of death and rebirth, designed to pass on hidden truths about the soul and the cosmos. Again, the idea is clear: wisdom was not for everyone. It was to be protected, revealed only to those deemed ready. The Druids of the Celtic world functioned in a similar way. They left behind no written records, not because they lacked the ability, but because they deliberately chose to guard their wisdom through oral tradition, away from prying eyes. They were said to hold knowledge of astronomy, healing, law, and the cycles of time. Roman writers often remarked on their secrecy, noting how jealously they protected their teachings. Could it be that their oral traditions preserved remnants of knowledge that had survived from an earlier forgotten age? Across the ocean, the Mayan and Aztec priesthoods performed the same role. They alone had access to the complex calendars, the astronomical tables, and the mathematical systems that tracked the movement of stars with incredible accuracy. Their codices, most of which were destroyed during conquest, likely contained knowledge passed down from generations of guardians who sought to preserve fragments of a much older system. Even today, the surviving Mayan calendar baffles us with its precision. How could a society without modern instruments measure celestial cycles with such accuracy, unless the knowledge had been preserved from a far earlier source? The pattern becomes even more striking when we look at the secret societies and brotherhoods that appeared throughout history. From the Pythagoreans in Greece to the Gnostics of the early Christian era, from the medieval alchemists to the Freemasons, we see the same motif: hidden knowledge, passed only to initiates through symbols, rituals, and codes. Many of these groups spoke openly of their wisdom being ancient, inherited from civilizations long gone. The alchemists, for instance, often referred to Egypt as the source of their secrets, claiming that the Emerald Tablet contained the foundation of all sciences. Freemasonry traced its symbolic lineage back to the builders of Solomon's Temple, and even further to the architects of the pyramids. Are these simply fanciful claims, or do they reflect a hidden stream of memory connecting all the way back to a lost world? Even the great libraries of history seem to hint at guardianship. The Library of Alexandria, often romanticized as a treasure house of human knowledge, may have contained text from civilizations predating Egypt and Mesopotamia. When it was destroyed, whether by fire or political decrees, an incalculable amount of wisdom was lost or perhaps deliberately erased. Some say fragments of that knowledge survived in secret collections, guarded by those who understood its true value. Medieval Europe's monasteries, for example, quietly preserved manuscripts that might otherwise have vanished during the chaos of the Dark Ages. Could some of those texts have carried whispers of far older knowledge, safeguarded by guardians who knew they were protecting more than simple philosophy or religion? What is fascinating is how often guardianship is linked to secrecy about cycles of destruction. The Mayans guarded the knowledge of world ages, each ending in catastrophe. Hindu traditions speak of yugas, vast epochs in which humanity rises and falls before being reset. Egyptian texts hint at the Zep Tepi, or first time, when gods walked the earth and civilization began anew after disaster. If knowledge of these cycles was once widely known, then it makes sense that guardians would preserve it carefully, warning only those they believed capable of understanding. To give such information to everyone might cause chaos, despair, or misuse. The question then becomes, what exactly were these guardians protecting? Was it simply philosophical and spiritual truths, or something more tangible? Some believe they preserved technological knowledge, methods of engineering, astronomy, or energy that could reshape the world if rediscovered. The stories of Atlantis often emphasize this idea that an advanced society misused its technology and brought about its own destruction. Survivors, realizing the danger, may have deliberately chosen to hide their knowledge until humanity was ready. If true, then the guardians were not only teachers but also protectors, ensuring that we did not destroy ourselves by rushing too quickly into power we could not control. But the guardianship of knowledge raises another disturbing possibility. What if it was not lost by accident, but suppressed deliberately? History is full of conquerors burning books, destroying temples, and silencing traditions that did not align with their rule. Could the guardians we hear about in myth and legend have been systematically hunted, their knowledge erased or forced underground? If so, then much of what we call progress today might simply be us rediscovering fragments of wisdom that once was common but was buried under centuries of suppression. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is that even now, in our supposedly enlightened age, echoes of this guardianship remain. Secret societies still exist, Esoteric traditions still claim to carry ancient wisdom. Whispers of hidden libraries beneath the sands of Egypt or sealed within the mountains of Tibet still circulate. And while mainstream academia dismisses these ideas as fantasy, one can't help but wonder, if so many cultures independently preserved the idea of guardians holding on to ancient knowledge, could there be truth behind the myth? If humanity truly is not the first advanced civilization, then the guardians may have been its last emissaries, preserving what they could before their world ended. They may have hidden their wisdom in temples, myths, and rituals, trusting that one day, when the time was right, we would decode their messages. The challenge now is whether we are prepared to receive it, or whether, like those who came before us, we will once again squander the gift. Every culture on earth tells stories of cities swallowed by the sea, kingdoms buried beneath deserts, or worlds destroyed and left in ruins. These are not just allegories of pride and downfall. They are specific enough, detailed enough, and widespread enough to make us wonder if they are more than myth. The idea of lost cities is not confined to a single legend like Atlantis. Instead, it stretches across the entire globe as if humanity carries a collective memory of civilizations that once flourished, but then vanished, leaving behind ruins hidden beneath waves, jungles, or mountains of sand. What's remarkable is that modern discoveries are beginning to uncover evidence that aligns disturbingly well with these ancient tales. Take Atlantis, the most famous of all. Plato described it not as a myth, but as a true account passed down through Egyptian priests to Solon, the Athenian lawmaker. He spoke of a mighty island empire that existed 9,000 years before his time, with canals, temples, and an organized society that eventually grew arrogant and was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, scholars dismissed Atlantis as a philosophical allegory, but when we consider other stories like the flood myths of Mesopotamia, the legends of Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, or the submerged temples off the coast of India, Atlantis no longer seems like an isolated invention. Instead, it looks like one piece of a much larger puzzle. Off the coast of Japan lies Yonaguni, an underwater site that has baffled researchers since its discovery in the 1980s. Massive stone structures with straight edges, steps, and terraces stretch across the seabed. While some argue it is a natural formation, others insist the precision and layout point to human design. If it truly is man-made, then it predates known Japanese civilization by thousands of years. What happened to the builders? Were they victims of the rising seas at the end of the last ice age, when coastlines flooded worldwide? India too holds mysteries beneath its waters. Off the coast of Gujarat, near Dwarka, archaeologists have discovered submerged ruins spread across miles of seabed. Ancient texts describe Dwarka as the city of Krishna, a dazzling metropolis that eventually sank into the sea. For centuries, this was dismissed as mythology, yet the ruins found beneath the waves include walls, grids, and artifacts that suggest advanced settlement thousands of years before the supposed founding of Indian civilization. The legends once thought to be allegory now appear to be historical memory. In the Mediterranean, we find the city of Heracleion, long considered a legend, until divers uncovered its ruins near Alexandria in the early 2000s. Giant statues, temple structures, and countless artifacts lay preserved underwater, testifying to a bustling port city that was lost to earthquakes and floods nearly 2,000 years ago. If one forgotten city could be rediscovered intact, how many more are waiting beneath the sea? South America adds more intrigue with the legendary city of Paititi, rumored to lie hidden in the jungles of Peru or Bolivia. Linked to the golden city of El Dorado, Paititi is said to have been a refuge of the Inca elite, where treasures and knowledge were hidden from the Spanish invaders. Though explorers have searched for centuries, satellite imagery has recently revealed geometric patterns in remote jungles, shapes that may point to lost settlements swallowed by vegetation. The jungle hides as much as the ocean, keeping humanity's past locked away beneath roots and soil. Even deserts preserve buried worlds. In Egypt, vast tracts of sand cover ruins older than the pyramids. The so-called lost city of the pharaohs discovered near Luxor revealed entire neighborhoods, workshops and streets that had lain hidden for millennia. In the Sahara, satellite images have shown strange circular patterns and buried rivers, suggesting that what is now desert was once fertile and possibly home to thriving civilization. If climate shifts could erase entire societies in Africa, how many more have been hidden beneath shifting landscapes across the planet? And then there are the truly ancient and mysterious sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. While not submerged, it was deliberately buried thousands of years ago, and forgotten until rediscovered in the night's massive stone pillars, decorated with carvings of animals and symbols, predate Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years. Why would people go to the effort of burying such a monumental site? Was it to preserve knowledge for a future time, or to protect it from a coming cataclysm? The very act of deliberate burial feels like a message, one that we are only now beginning to decode. The possibility of sunken worlds becomes even more convincing when we look at geology. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose by more than 400 feet. Entire coastlines disappeared, and any civilization living near the sea would have been obliterated. Today, more than half the world's population lives within 60 miles of the coast. If an advanced society had existed in prehistoric times, its cities would now lie underwater, invisible to us unless we go searching beneath the waves. The archaeological record we know today is incomplete, not because history was empty, but because much of it is submerged. The consistent theme in these stories is destruction, catastrophes, whether floods, earthquakes, or cosmic impacts, destroyed these worlds in sudden and violent ways. Survivors carried fragments of memory forward, embedding them in myths so that their descendants would never forget. The fact that these stories resonate so strongly across cultures is itself evidence. When the Maya, Egyptians, Sumerians, Greeks, and Polynesians all speak of great floods and sunken lands, they are not all imagining the same thing by accident. They are remembering. The implications are staggering. If buried cities and sunken worlds are real, then our history is incomplete, perhaps deliberately so. What we call the dawn of civilization may only be a restart, a recovery after the last great catastrophe. The ruins under the seas are not primitive. They suggest societies that were already advanced enough to build monuments, align structures with celestial events, and create maps of the world. Could it be that what we think of as the beginning was really a second chapter? And if so, what does that mean for our future? Some believe that within these buried worlds lie not only ruins but records, libraries of stone, repositories of knowledge left for us to find. Legends of the Hall of Records in Egypt, said to be hidden beneath the Sphinx, or the crystal archives of Atlantis speak of wisdom sealed away until humanity is ready. Whether metaphorical or literal, these ideas suggest that the ancients wanted their knowledge preserved. The challenge is whether we are wise enough to uncover it before it's too late. But perhaps the most haunting thought is this: what if our own cities, gleaming and modern, are destined to become the buried worlds of tomorrow? What if, thousands of years from now, future generations will dive into the seas to find New York or Tokyo lying in ruins beneath the waves, just as we search today for Atlantis and Dwarka? The cycle of rising and falling, of building and burying, may not be a one-time tragedy. It may be the rhythm of human civilization itself. Around the world, carved into mountainsides, etched on temple walls, and preserved in stone monuments that defy time, there are records of cataclysms. These are not random decorations or simple artistic expressions. They are warnings, messages from the past, telling us of moments when the earth shook violently, when fire rained from the sky, when oceans swallowed entire kingdoms, and when humanity barely survived. These cataclysms in stone are everywhere, if we care to look, and they suggest that the Earth's story is not one of slow, steady progress, but of cycles of destruction and rebirth. And here's the strange part: many of these carvings, statues, and monuments describe events that match scientific evidence of real global catastrophes. Let's begin with Göbekli Tepe, that enigmatic site in Turkey that predates every known civilization. Its massive stone pillars are carved with animals, symbols, and cosmic imagery. For years, archaeologists believed it was simply a ceremonial site, but recent studies suggest something more extraordinary. Some researchers argue that the carvings record the impact of a comet around 10,800 BCE, a cosmic event that may have triggered the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. The vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe appears to depict a date written in the stars, a time when the earth was struck from above. If true, this would mean the builders were not simply primitive hunters, but survivors, recording in stone the cataclysm that destroyed their world. Egypt, too, is filled with echoes of destruction. The walls of temples describe floods, fire, and upheavals that reshaped the land. The so-called inventory stela, often dismissed by mainstream scholars, speaks of the Great Sphinx existing before the time of Pharaoh Khufu, already weathered by water in an age when Egypt was lush and green. Geological studies of the Sphinx enclosure show signs of heavy rainfall erosion, suggesting it may have been carved thousands of years earlier than conventional history allows, possibly at the end of the last ice age when cataclysmic floods swept the land. If the Sphinx is older, then it stands as a stone witness to disasters that predate dynastic Egypt. In South America, the megalithic structures of Pumapunku in Bolivia lie scattered like the aftermath of an explosion. Enormous blocks weighing hundreds of tons are tossed about as if by some massive force. The precision of their cuts shows mastery of engineering, yet the site looks as though it was torn apart suddenly and violently. Was it an earthquake, a flood, or something else entirely? Local legends speak of Viracocha, the great teacher god, arriving after a world-ending flood. Perhaps Pumapunku was one of those lost cities shattered by catastrophe, its ruins left as a reminder of what had come before. The Mayan and Aztec civilizations also recorded cycles of destruction in their stone codices and temples. They spoke of suns, ages of the world, each ending in disaster. One by flood, another by fire, another by earthquake. We live now, they said, in the fifth sun, destined eventually to fall like the others. The Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque and other Mayan sites preserve records of these cycles, as though to warn future generations that nothing lasts forever. What makes this chilling is that their timelines align roughly with known geological events, such as massive volcanic eruptions and sudden climate shifts. Even in Europe, ancient stone monuments may encode knowledge of catastrophe. Stonehenge, long thought of as a calendar or observatory, could also have served as a warning system. Its alignment with solstices and lunar cycles may have been designed to track celestial patterns, not just for agriculture, but to anticipate cosmic events like eclipses, comets, or meteor showers, potential harbingers of disaster. The builders may have witnessed cataclysms and sought to prevent future ones by watching the heavens closely. Further east in India, ancient temples tell stories in stone of great floods and fire raining from the skies. The Mahabharata, one of the world's oldest epics, describes wars with weapons so powerful they seem almost nuclear in nature. Bright flashes, scorching winds, and destruction that lasted for generations. While many interpret these passages symbolically, the fact that they are carved and preserved in temple walls shows how seriously the ancients took their warnings. Were these accounts of divine wars or records of natural cataclysms so terrifying that they could only be described in terms of godlike power? Let's not forget Easter Island, with its iconic Moai statues. While most focus on their mystery of construction, local oral traditions speak of a time when the island suffered devastating ecological collapse, and possibly even external cataclysms. The statues, some argue, were not just monuments but sentinels, guardians carved to honor ancestors who had endured upheaval and loss. The silence of those stone faces feels almost like a memory of something that cannot be spoken but must not be forgotten. Geology and science, interestingly, support much of what these stones tell us. Around 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas period saw massive floods, climate shifts, and sudden extinctions. Megafauna disappeared, sea levels rose, and human societies were forced to adapt or vanish. Evidence of massive glacial meltwater floods exists in places like North America's Scablands, where entire landscapes were carved out in a geological instant. Cosmic impact studies reveal that fragments of a comet may have struck the Earth around this time, igniting wildfires and sending the climate into chaos. This aligns eerily with what Göbekli Tepe and other ancient sites seem to be telling us, that the world ended once, and survivors carried that memory in stone. But why stone? Why not oral tradition alone? The answer is durability. Stone endures where words fade. Carve your warning into a wall or pillar, and it might survive thousands of years, waiting for a future civilization to uncover it. The ancients seem to understand this. They may not have known if paper or wood would last, but they knew that stone would carry their message across millennia. And perhaps deep down they knew the cycle of destruction would repeat, and the next civilization would need to be reminded. The most unsettling part of these cataclysms in stone is the possibility that they are not just history, but prophecy. If the ancients recorded cycles of destruction, then they may have known, or at least suspected, that such cycles would continue. Our modern science is only now beginning to understand long-term cycles of climate, cosmic impacts, and tectonic upheaval. But what if the ancients already knew, having lived through them before? Their monuments may not only be records of the past, but warnings of the future. Imagine standing in front of the Sphinx, the Moai, or the stones of Göbekli Tepe and realizing that these are not simply relics of ancient cultures, survival manuals carved in rock. They whisper across time, "We endured fire, water, and darkness, and so might you, but only if you remember." If there is one thing that binds ancient civilizations across the globe, it is their obsession with the stars. Everywhere we look, in the desert sands of Egypt, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, on windswept plateaus in Peru, and even on remote islands in the Pacific, we find monuments that align not randomly, but precisely with celestial bodies. The ancients weren't just looking at the skies in wonder. They were encoding something, perhaps a message, perhaps a warning, into stone, myth, and ritual. It's as if they wanted to ensure that long after their civilizations were gone, the stars themselves would carry the story forward. This code of the stars is not a coincidence. It's a universal language, one that humanity has forgotten how to read. Take the pyramids of Giza. For centuries they have stood as symbols of mystery, but their placement is no accident. The three Great Pyramids are aligned with uncanny precision to the belt stars of Orion. The Sphinx, gazing east, aligns with the rising of Leo thousands of years ago, at a time when the skies looked very different. Mainstream Egyptology tells us the pyramids were tombs, yet no mummies have ever been found within the Great Pyramid. Instead, what we see is a structure built to endure eternity, its geometry reflecting cosmic principles, its shafts pointing towards specific stars. Was this simply religious symbolism, or were the builders encoding knowledge of celestial cycles, marking the heavens as a cosmic clock to warn of events that recur over vast stretches of time? Half a world away, the Mayans built temples that also mirrored the stars. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan creates a serpent of light and shadow during the equinoxes, a breathtaking display of astronomical precision. Their calendar, more accurate than the Gregorian one we use today, tracked not only solar years, but also cycles of Venus and the Moon. To the Mayans, these cycles were not mere curiosities. They dictated the rise and fall of ages. They believed that humanity existed in repeating epochs, each ending in cataclysm. Their stone codices, their pyramids, and their astronomical tables all tell the same story. The stars hold the key to understanding humanity's fate. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert, giant geoglyphs of animals, spirals and straight lines that can only be fully seen from the air. Many of these align with celestial events, pointing to solstices and specific stars. Were they maps, ritual pathways, or messages to the heavens themselves? Some suggest they were designed to signal beings from above, while others argue they were part of a massive calendar system etched into the earth. Either way, the connection to the stars is undeniable. The Nazca culture seemed to understand that the heavens were not just above, they were woven into the fabric of human destiny. Stonehenge, in England, too, speaks this universal language. Its massive stones align with solstices, eclipses, and lunar cycles. The builders dragged multi-ton stones across miles of land with no wheels, no advanced technology, and yet placed them with surgical precision to mark cosmic events. Was it simply a ceremonial site for agriculture, or was it something more? Some researchers suggest Stonehenge was part of a larger network of sites across Britain, all aligned to track celestial movements. If true, this means the builders weren't just farmers marking seasons. They were astronomer priests encoding the cycles of the cosmos into their landscape. The code of the stars is also visible in the myths themselves. The Greeks told of gods placed among constellations, their stories written in the heavens. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia saw the emu in the sky, a dark constellation made not of stars but of the spaces between them, and wove their culture around its seasonal movements. The Dogon of Malay in West Africa knew of Sirius and its invisible companion star long before modern telescopes confirmed it. How could they know such details unless fragments of advanced astronomical knowledge had been passed down from an earlier source? What makes this even more intriguing is that many of these alignments seem to point not to the skies of today, but to the skies of thousands of years ago. Precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, changes the position of the stars over millennia, yet sites like Giza and the Sphinx appear to encode alignments from around 10,500 BCE, a time that coincides with the end of the last ice age, when cataclysms reshaped the world. Were these monuments marking a date? Were they telling us, remember this time, for it will come again? This leads to a chilling thought. If the ancients encoded knowledge of cycles in the stars, perhaps they understood that catastrophes are not random, but part of cosmic rhythms, comet impacts, solar outbursts, and magnetic shifts. These could all be linked to cycles that repeat across thousands of years. The ancients may have witnessed destruction and then immortalized it in their architecture, hoping future generations would recognize the signs when the stars aligned again. It wasn't just about honoring gods, it was about survival. Even modern science supports the idea of cosmic cycles influencing Earth. Studies of impact craters, ice cores, and solar activity reveal patterns. Catastrophes often cluster around specific intervals, as if the Earth passes through danger zones in space on a predictable schedule. The ancients may have encoded this knowledge in ways we are only now beginning to rediscover. The pyramids, the temples, the megaliths, they may not just be monuments to the past, but warning markers for the future. Why encode it in stone and myth instead of directly writing it down? The answer is endurance. Civilizations collapse, languages vanish, libraries burn, but the stars remain constant, and stone endure. By aligning their monuments to celestial events, the ancients created messages that transcend time. Even if their words were lost, the alignments would still be there for anyone willing to look. The code of the stars was their way of speaking across millennia. The haunting question is whether we are listening. Today, we dismiss myths as fantasy and monuments as mere religious symbolism. But what if we are ignoring the greatest survival guide humanity has ever been given? What if the ancients, through sweat, blood, and sacrifice, built monuments not for glory but as messages, telling us that cycles of destruction are real, and that the stars will announce their return? As we look deeper into the code of the stars, one thing becomes clear. The ancients were not primitive. They were survivors, astronomers, and guardians of memory. They encoded their warnings not in fragile books or fleeting words, but in the heavens themselves, trusting that someday, when the cycle returned, someone would recognize the signs. The question is, will everywhere we look in the ruins of the past, there are warnings, but they are not shouted. They are whispered, encoded in stone, myth, and ritual, waiting for those who are willing to listen. These silent warnings are not written in bold letters or spelled out in plain instructions, because the ancients understood something we often forget. Civilizations rise and fall, languages change, and even memory fades. If they wanted their message to endure, it had to be subtle enough to outlast fire, flood, conquest, and ignorance. It had to be carved into permanence, hidden in symbols, and preserved in stories that could survive the erosion of time. What's striking is how often these warnings point to the same themes: cycles of destruction, arrogance leading to downfall, and the danger of forgetting who we are and where we came from. Take the story of Atlantis, told by Plato. Most people focus on the grandeur of the lost city, its technology and its sudden destruction. But if we look closer, the real lesson isn't about the magnificence of Atlantis at all. It's about why it fell. Plato describes a society that began in harmony, guided by wisdom, but eventually grew greedy, corrupt, and power-hungry. Their arrogance drew the wrath of the gods, and their world was swallowed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Whether Atlantis was a real place or a symbolic tale, its warning is clear. When civilizations lose their balance, when they mistake power for wisdom, destruction follows. And if Plato was passing on a memory given to the Greeks by the Egyptians, then the story isn't just allegory. It's a fragment of history, preserved as a cautionary tale. Flood myths are another kind of silent warning, found in nearly every culture. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood that destroyed nearly all of humanity, sparing only Utnapishtim, who survived in a great vessel. In the Bible, Noah's Ark preserves life through the deluge. In Hindu texts, Manu is warned by a fish of a flood that will destroy the world, and he builds a boat to survive. In Mesoamerican traditions, the gods send floods to wipe out failed creations of humanity. What unites all these stories isn't just the flood itself, it's the lesson that destruction comes in cycles, and only those who prepare survive. Imagine for a moment that these myths are not exaggerations but records. Imagine that the ancients encoded their trauma into myth, so that future generations would never forget that the waters rise, and they will rise again. Then there are the warnings hidden in monuments themselves. The Sphinx, half buried in sand for centuries, stares east toward the rising sun. Its weathered body tells a story that mainstream scholars hesitate to admit, that it has endured rainfall erosion from an age when Egypt was lush, long before dynastic history. If true, it means the Sphinx is not a monument to a pharaoh but a silent witness to an earlier world, one destroyed by catastrophe. Its cracked paws and eroded sides are not just scars of age, they may be scars of survival, a message in stone telling us, we were here before, and it ended badly. Mayan temples, with their precise calendars, deliver another silent message. The long count calendar doesn't just track years, it tracks cycles of creation and destruction. Their belief in previous worlds, each destroyed in turn, wasn't mythology for entertainment. It was a way of saying, pay attention, because the clock is ticking, and it will reset. When their monuments align with Venus or with eclipses, they are not simply honoring gods, they are embedding cosmic cycles into architecture. The lesson is hidden, but it is clear for those who know how to look. Even in the Norse myths of Ragnarok, we find echoes of the same warning. They speak of a world consumed by fire, shaken by earthquakes, and drowned by flood, only to rise again, green and renewed, for a new cycle of humanity. The gods themselves fall, but survivors emerge to repopulate the world. Why would such a bleak yet hopeful narrative appear in Scandinavia, thousands of miles from Sumer, Egypt or Mesoamerica, unless all these cultures were remembering the same thing? The warning is silent but universal. Destruction is not an end, but a risk. Humanity forgets, but the earth remembers. Another form of silent warning lies in symbols. The serpent, for instance, appears in myths across the globe. To some it represents wisdom, to others destruction. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl brought civilization, only to leave with a promise to return. In biblical tradition, the serpent is the deceiver, a figure whose actions forever altered humanity's fate. In Eastern thought, the serpent represents cycles of energy and rebirth. Different interpretations, yet the core is the same. The serpent embodies power, and power misused brings ruin. Could it be that the serpent is less a religious figure and more a symbol of knowledge itself, dangerous, double-edged, and requiring responsibility? If so, then the serpent is not just myth, but a silent emblem warning us about the cost of mishandling the gifts we've inherited. Stone monuments worldwide also hide warnings in their alignments. They don't speak in words, but in geometry. When the pyramids point to Orion, or Stonehenge aligns with the solstice, or the Nazca lines stretch towards celestial events, they are telling us to look upward. They are telling us to track the skies, because what happens above eventually comes crashing down on Earth. Comets, meteors, solar flares, these were not abstract threats to the ancients. They were lived realities, cataclysms they witnessed, encoded into monuments so we would never forget. Yet here we are, thousands of years later, treating them as curiosities instead of survival guides. What makes the silence of these warnings so powerful is that they don't demand belief. They wait. They rest in stone, in myth, in the architecture of cultures long gone. They don't shout. They whisper. And because they whisper, they endure. Fire can burn libraries, but it cannot erase a pyramid. Conquerors can rewrite texts, but they cannot move a mountain aligned to the stars. Language can vanish, but a myth told in different words still carries the same message. These warnings are silent, because silence is what allows them to survive. The tragedy is that modern humanity is not listening. We walk among ruins, marvel at their size, photograph their shadows, and call them mysteries, but we rarely ask whether they are speaking to us directly. What if the reason so many ancient structures were built on a scale of permanence was because their builders knew destruction would come again, and they wanted to leave us a message we couldn't ignore? What if the myths of floods, fire, and cycles weren't primitive superstition, but historical memory, carefully wrapped in symbolism to survive the erosion of time? The silence of these warnings should terrify us more than anything, because silence implies patience. It implies inevitability. The ancients didn't scream across time because they knew the cycle would prove them right. Their monuments, myths, and symbols don't beg for attention. They simply exist, waiting for the moment when their relevance becomes undeniable, and perhaps that moment is closer than we realize. When we walk through the ruins scattered across the world, from the jungles of Central America to the deserts of Egypt, from the islands of the Pacific to the frozen tundra of Siberia, it is as though we are listening to faint echoes from civilizations long silenced. These echoes are not loud proclamations, not the kind of evidence that demands immediate recognition. Instead, they are fragments, whispers of architecture, shards of technology, traces of knowledge that tease us with the possibility that the story of humanity is far older, far richer, and far stranger than we have been taught. They reverberate across time, hinting at lives lived, wisdom lost, and catastrophes endured, all reminding us that ours is not the only age of greatness. The echoes of lost civilizations are everywhere, and when pieced together they form a chorus too powerful to ignore. Consider the megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon. At the foundation of this site are stones so massive that even modern cranes would struggle to move them. Why would an ancient people, supposedly limited to primitive tools, build with blocks weighing hundreds of tons when smaller stones would have sufficed? The scale of these structures is itself an echo, a reminder that something about the builders defies our assumptions. Did they inherit knowledge of engineering from a forgotten predecessor? Were these stones meant to outlast cataclysm, to remain standing when all else fell? The answer is uncertain, but the question itself lingers like a haunting voice from the past. Far across the ocean, in the jungles of Guatemala and Mexico, the temples of the Maya rise above the canopy. Their inscriptions tell of cycles of creation and destruction, of worlds that lived and worlds that died, of gods who judged humanity and reset the clock of existence. These are not the idle fancies of a people disconnected from reality. They are echoes of collective memory, stories passed down through centuries, perhaps millennia, recounting catastrophes so immense they scarred the psyche of humanity itself. Each temple, each glyph, is a fragment of a warning, a retelling of something their ancestors endured and feared would come again. And then there is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, a site that defies the very timeline of history. Built around 12,000 years ago, long before agriculture or cities were thought to exist, its intricately carved pillars depict animals, symbols and celestial alignments that hint at a sophisticated understanding of both nature and the cosmos. How could a supposedly nomadic people, without farming, muster the resources and knowledge to build such a site? The answer may lie in the possibility that Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of civilization, but its echo, a remnant of something older, something lost, rebuilt by survivors who remembered fragments of the world before the great floods. Its very existence is a shout across time, telling us that the neat, linear story of human progress is incomplete. The echoes are not limited to monuments. They are buried in myths and traditions, carried in the oral histories of indigenous peoples who describe events modern science is only beginning to verify. Native American legends speak of great floods and firestorms. Aboriginal Australians recount stories of rising seas that swallowed their lands, stories now matched by geological evidence of post-Ice Age flooding. Polynesian voyagers tell of lands that vanished beneath the waves, tales that align with drowned landscapes found by sonar beneath the Pacific. These stories, preserved for thousands of years, are not simply cultural artifacts. They are echoes of lived experience, memories passed down like torches through the darkness of forgotten ages. Even more haunting are the ruins hidden beneath the sea. Off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni lie structures that appear carved, with steps, terraces, and geometric patterns. Mainstream scholars argue they are natural formations, yet the precision and alignment suggest human design. If Yonaguni is indeed man-made, then it is an echo from a time when sea levels were lower, before rising waters swallowed entire coastlines. Similarly, submerged ruins off India's coast near Dwarka point to cities now lost beneath the Arabian Sea. These underwater ruins are not anomalies. They are proof that civilizations once flourished in places that are now inaccessible, their voices muffled by the ocean but still echoing through sonar scans and diver reports. The echoes also resonate through artifacts that should not exist. Ancient maps, like the Piri Reis map of the 16th century, appear to show coastlines of Antarctica free of ice, something supposedly unknown until modern times. How could such knowledge exist unless it was inherited, copied from sources older than recorded history? Ooparts, out-of-place artifacts like intricate metal objects found in geological layers, millions of years old, or batteries from Mesopotamia that suggest knowledge of electricity, all speak to possibilities we are not ready to accept. These are not definitive proofs, but tantalizing hints, echoes of technologies and sciences that we have not yet grasped. Even our DNA carries the faint whispers of lost ages. Genetic studies reveal that humanity went through bottlenecks, near extinctions, where our population was reduced to small numbers before rebounding. What caused these collapses? Climate change? Catastrophic impacts? Diseases? Whatever the answer, it means that entire chapters of human experience were erased, leaving only the faintest biological echo within us. We are survivors, carrying the legacy of people who faced unimaginable trials, yet their names, their cultures, and their wisdom are gone, leaving only questions where answers should be. The tragedy of these echoes is that we rarely listen to them with seriousness. Archaeologists debate, skeptics dismiss, and mainstream history shrugs. But the echoes do not fade. They remain persistent, refusing to disappear. They reverberate from stone to sea, from myth to memory, daring us to put the pieces together. Perhaps the reason they remain echoes rather than clear voices is that we are not ready to hear them in full. Perhaps, like children ignoring the advice of elders, we must first stumble before we recognize the wisdom that was offered long ago. Yet, there is also hope in these echoes. Because they survived at all means that the ancients wanted us to hear them. They wanted their memory, their lessons, their warnings to cross the gulf of time, whether through myth, monument, or artifact. They left us a trail of breadcrumbs, a way back to understanding. And if we can learn to listen not just with our ears, but with our imagination, our science, and our humility, then the echoes may become a guide. They may help us navigate the same cycles of destruction they endured, steering us towards survival rather than collapse. The echoes of lost civilizations remind us of something vital, that we are not alone in history. We are part of a cycle, inheritors of forgotten worlds, survivors of catastrophes we barely understand. To ignore these echoes is to walk blindly into the future, repeating the same mistakes. To listen is to awaken, to realize that the ruins, the myths, the artifacts are not relics of strangers, but messages from family, our ancestors across time, whispering, "We were here before. Learn from us, before it's too late." When we speak of hidden knowledge, it is easy to imagine dusty scrolls locked in forgotten vaults, or secret books buried deep within the archives of ancient libraries. But the truth is both more subtle and far more unsettling. The knowledge we have lost, or perhaps had taken from us, is not confined to isolated relics or manuscripts. It is the memory of entire civilizations, their sciences, their understanding of the cosmos, their connection to forces that modern society still struggles to define. Pieces of this knowledge surface in myths, in inexplicable monuments, in fragments of forgotten languages, and even in traditions that seem too sophisticated to have arisen by chance. It is hidden not only because it has been buried beneath the weight of time, but because we as a species have been taught to look away from it, to dismiss it, to call it superstition or coincidence rather than admit it challenges the narrative we have built about ourselves. Take, for instance, the knowledge encoded within the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is not just a tomb, as conventional history insists. Its proportions contain mathematical relationships so precise they mirror measurements of the Earth itself. The length of its base relating to the circumference of the planet, its height corresponding to the distance between Earth and the Sun. How could ancient builders, supposedly without advanced instruments, encode such astronomical and geodetic knowledge into stone? Some suggest coincidence, but the precision is too consistent, too intentional. Could it be that the pyramid is not merely architecture but a message? A monument designed to survive catastrophe, carrying hidden knowledge forward into the future. Consider also the knowledge embedded in the stars. Cultures separated by oceans thousands of years apart somehow charted the heavens with astonishing accuracy. The Dogon people of West Africa, for example, held traditions about the star Sirius long before modern telescopes revealed that it was a binary system, containing a faint companion star invisible to the naked eye. How could they have known? Was it inheritance from a forgotten teacher, ancient visitors, or an echo of a lost scientific tradition far older than we realize? Whatever the case, it is hidden knowledge, preserved in oral history where textbooks dare not tread. Then there are the myths that carry layers of meaning only now being decoded. The Sumerian texts, among the oldest written records on Earth, speak of gods descending from the heavens, of knowledge granted to humanity, of great floods and restarts of civilization. At first glance, these are myths, no different from fairy tales. Yet the deeper we dig, the more we find that the myths align with geology, astronomy, and archaeology. Could they be coded records, ancient attempts to preserve history through symbolism? If so, then hidden within their lines is the story of real catastrophes, real teachers, and real struggles that our textbooks have erased. Hidden knowledge also exists in plain sight, in the rituals, symbols, and traditions that have survived from antiquity. Alchemy, for instance, was long dismissed as the foolish quest to turn lead into gold, but modern interpretations suggest it may have been an encoded spiritual science, a way of teaching transformation not of metals but of consciousness itself. Similarly, sacred geometry, dismissed as artistic flourish, turns out to encode universal mathematical truths that appear again and again in nature, from the spirals of galaxies to the growth of seashells. Why did ancient people revere these forms? Were they pointing us toward the blueprint of creation itself, a code hidden in the fabric of reality? We also find hidden knowledge in artifacts that should not exist. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, is a 2,000-year-old analog computer capable of predicting eclipses and planetary positions with incredible precision. For centuries, historians claimed such technology was impossible in antiquity, until the artifact itself proved otherwise. If one such device survived, how many more have been lost? And if ancient people could master mechanical computers, what else might they have known? Electricity? Magnetism? Energy systems we have not yet rediscovered. The thought is staggering, but perhaps the most haunting form of hidden knowledge is the possibility that much of it was not lost accidentally. Throughout history, we see patterns of deliberate suppression. Libraries burned, from Alexandria to Nalanda, temples destroyed by conquering empires, text rewritten to suit the victor's narratives. How much of humanity's story has been censored, erased, not by the forces of nature, but by the choices of men? When we read myths that contradict the official timeline, are we glimpsing the pieces of knowledge that escape deliberate obliteration? If so, then hidden knowledge is not only buried in the earth, but locked away in the vaults of secrecy, guarded because it might destabilize the comfortable version of history we have been taught to accept. The question then is why? Why hide it? Why bury truths about who we are and where we come from? Perhaps it is because knowledge is power, and power in the wrong hands becomes dangerous. Or perhaps it is because those in control feared that admitting to cycles of collapse, to civilizations before us, would shatter the illusion of permanence and dominance that every empire tries to project. Whatever the reason, the effect is the same. Humanity today walks blind to its own past, unaware that the key to surviving the future lies hidden in the very stories we dismiss as fantasy. And yet, despite all attempts to bury it, knowledge finds a way to endure. It hides in plain sight in symbols carved into temples, in oral traditions passed down through tribes, in ruins aligned perfectly to solstices, in languages whose roots reach beyond history. It waits for us to listen, to piece it together, to recognize that what we call myth may be memory, what we call legend may be record, and what we call impossible may simply be knowledge we have not yet regained. This is the real challenge of hidden knowledge. It demands humility. It asks us to admit that we do not know everything, that our modern science, though advanced, is not the pinnacle of human understanding, but merely one stage in a much longer, older journey. To embrace hidden knowledge is to step into the unknown, to consider that the answers to our deepest questions, who we are, where we came from, and where we are going, may not lie in the future alone, but in the fragments left by civilizations we barely acknowledge. And perhaps that is why it remains hidden, not because it cannot be found, but because most of us are not yet ready to seek it. But for those who dare, who look beyond the surface, who listen to the whispers in myths and the patterns in stones, the hidden knowledge is waiting. It is the bridge between the past and the future, the torch passed down through the ages. Whether we choose to carry it or ignore it will determine not only how we understand our past, but whether we survive the cycles that have destroyed those who came before us. One of the most unsettling truths we encounter when studying history is the realization that civilizations are not immortal. They are fragile, temporary constructs, subject to forces beyond their control. Time and again, empires rise with grandeur, expand with ambition, and fall with shocking finality. What is often overlooked is that these collapses are not random, isolated tragedies. They are part of a repeating pattern, a cycle that has haunted humanity since its earliest days. And as uncomfortable as it may be to admit, this cycle is still turning, and it may soon come knocking at our own door. The ancients understood this better than we give them credit for. Nearly every culture that left us myths or records also warned of cycles, ages of creation and destruction, worlds that rise and worlds that fall. The Mayans wrote of successive suns, each representing an age of humanity destroyed by fire, flood, or wind, only to be reborn again. Hindu texts describe vast cosmic cycles called yugas, in which humanity ascends into golden ages of knowledge before descending into darkness and collapse. The Greeks spoke of ages of man, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each worse than the one before, ending in catastrophe. These were not idle stories invented to pass the time. They were warnings, encoded into myth to ensure survival of the knowledge. To the ancients, the cycle was not theory, it was reality, something they lived through and desperately wanted their descendants to remember. Even archaeology reveals the same truth. Civilizations that once seemed invincible crumbled into dust. The mighty Roman Empire collapsed under the weight of corruption, overexpansion, and external pressure. The Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean vanished almost overnight, around 1200 BCE, in what scholars call the Bronze Age collapse, a domino effect of war, famine, and natural disaster that plunged entire regions into darkness. The Mayan Empire, with its towering pyramids and advanced astronomy, collapsed under mysterious conditions, leaving its cities swallowed by jungle. Every case is different, but the pattern is the same: rise, flourish, decline, collapse. And with each fall, humanity loses knowledge, technology, and wisdom, forced to rebuild from the fragments left behind. What makes the cycle truly haunting is how sudden collapse can be. People living in the peak of their civilization rarely see the end coming. For the Romans, life went on with games, trade, and politics, until barbarians stormed their gates. For the people of the Indus Valley, thriving cities with advanced sanitation systems simply emptied, abandoned without explanation. For the inhabitants of Easter Island, who carved the colossal Moai statues, society unraveled into famine and conflict, until the population dwindled. Collapse feels gradual in hindsight, but for those living through it, the shift can be shockingly fast. One generation builds monuments, the next scavenges among ruins. The question that haunts us now is whether our modern world is truly different. We like to believe we've broken the cycle that technology, science, and globalization have insulated us from the vulnerabilities of past civilizations. But the truth is far more unsettling. If anything, we are more vulnerable because the systems we depend on are interconnected and fragile. Unlike the Romans, we don't rely on aqueducts and farms alone. We rely on a global web of technology, supply chains, and energy grids that can be disrupted by a single shock. Imagine if power grids failed for weeks. Imagine if the internet collapsed, if food supply chains broke down, if climate shifts disrupted harvests worldwide. The fragility of our civilization is hidden beneath a veneer of progress. But beneath that veneer, the same cycle lurks. Modern science even suggests that the cycle of collapse is not just cultural, but environmental. Climate change, asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and solar flares all have the potential to reset civilizations in an instant. Geological records reveal that Earth has gone through sudden violent shifts, mass extinctions, ice ages, floods, that could devastate even the most advanced society. We like to think we are untouchable, but one asteroid strike, one eruption like Toba or Tambora, could plunge humanity back into survival mode. History teaches us that nature does not negotiate, and civilizations that forget this truth often pay the price. But the cycle is not purely about destruction. It is also about renewal. Every collapse clears the slate, and from the ashes new civilizations rise. When Rome fell, Europe eventually entered the Renaissance, a rebirth of knowledge and art. After the Bronze Age collapse, new powers like Greece and Persia emerged, carrying forward fragments of the old. Collapse is not the end of humanity. It is the end of arrogance, the end of thinking we are invincible. And it is a chance to begin again, wiser, stronger, and perhaps more humble. The real danger lies not in the cycle itself, but in forgetting it exists. When we convince ourselves that collapse is impossible, that we are immune because of our technology, we repeat the same mistakes that brought down those before us. Overconsumption, inequality, environmental exploitation, unchecked ambition, these are the signs of civilizations approaching their breaking point. The echoes are clear, the warnings are written in both myth and stone, but will we listen? Or will we continue to build higher towers on weaker foundations until the cycle sweeps us away? There are also those who believe the cycle is not merely historical or environmental, but cosmic. Some researchers suggest that Earth itself passes through periods of increased danger, comet showers, solar activity, magnetic shifts that coincide with collapses in human history. If this is true, then the cycle is written not only in human behavior, but in the very rhythms of the cosmos. The ancients who aligned their monuments with stars and tracked the heavens obsessively may have known this. They may have seen collapse not as random but as inevitable, part of the great heartbeat of the universe. If so, then our challenge is not to stop the cycle, but to prepare for it, to endure it, and to emerge on the other side with our knowledge intact. What makes this perspective even more compelling is how civilizations themselves often predicted their own fall. The Mayans carved prophecies into stone, the Norse spoke of Ragnarok. Even the Bible contains visions of apocalypse, of worlds ending and beginning again. Why would so many cultures invest so much energy in imagining destruction unless they had lived through it before? Collapse was not just a fear, it was a memory, etched into the collective consciousness, carried forward as myth so that the survivors would not forget. And yet, here we are, living as though the cycle has been broken, as though we are the exception. Perhaps that is the greatest danger of all, not the cycle itself, but our refusal to acknowledge it. Because whether we admit it or not, the signs are all around us. Environmental strain, political instability, technological overdependence, and a growing sense of fragility beneath the surface of modern life. These are not random problems. They are symptoms of the same disease that has claimed every great civilization before us. The cycle does not care about our pride, our technology, or our ambition. It will turn, whether we are ready or not. The cycle repeats. That is the lesson the ancients tried to teach us, the truth written in myth and ruin. And while we cannot stop it, we can learn from it. We can choose to build systems that are resilient, to preserve knowledge in ways that cannot be easily lost, to approach our place in the world with humility rather than hubris. If we do not, then we risk becoming just another echo, another layer of ruins for future generations to puzzle over. Perhaps the real test of our civilization is not whether we can achieve greatness, but whether we can break the cycle, or at the very least survive it intact. That question remains unanswered, hanging over us like a shadow. But one thing is certain. History does not lie. The cycle has repeated countless times before, and unless we act differently, it will repeat again. The only question left is whether we will listen to the warnings or ignore them until it's too late. When we speak of survivors, we are not just speaking of people who endured catastrophes by chance or luck. We are speaking of those who carried forward the memory of entire civilizations, those who became living bridges between a vanished world and a new beginning. The survivor's legacy is more than bones and bloodlines. It is knowledge, warnings and fragments of wisdom encoded in myths, monuments and rituals. They were the ones who refused to let the past vanish completely, who bore the heavy burden of remembering in order to give the future a chance. Without them, humanity's story would be broken into unrecognizable pieces. With them, we are left with echoes faint but persistent, reminding us that collapse is not only about destruction but also about continuity. Think of the flood myths told across the globe, from Mesopotamia's tale of Utnapishtim to the biblical Noah, from Manu in India to the oral traditions of Native Americans and Pacific Islanders. The story repeats: a world drowned in water, a chosen survivor, the preservation of knowledge, animals, and seed, and the rebirth of life. These tales are not coincidences. They are survivors' legacies, encoded in story form, so the memory of catastrophe would never fade. Imagine a small group of people, traumatized by seeing their world consumed by rising seas, desperately trying to explain what happened to their children and grandchildren. Over generations, those accounts became myth, but the core remained, a warning that the world can be washed away in an instant, and that survival depends on preparation and preservation. The survivors also left legacies in stone, the megalithic structures scattered across the globe, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, the pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica, the stone heads of Easter Island, are not merely monuments, They are messages. Their alignments with stars, solstices, and equinoxes are not random decoration. They are astronomical markers designed to teach future generations how to read the heavens, how to track cycles, and perhaps how to anticipate the return of catastrophe. These survivors knew that stories could be dismissed, but stone endures. Their legacy was not just survival in their own time, but the foresight to guide those who would come thousands of years later. Even language carries their imprint. Words, symbols, and oral traditions often encode practical survival knowledge disguised as myth. Consider the Aboriginal stories of Australia, which recount in detail the locations of waterholes, food sources, and safe pathways across a harsh landscape. These stories, often framed as mythological journeys of ancestral beings, are in fact survival maps that have lasted tens of thousands of years. Similarly, Polynesian navigation chants, passed orally through generations, encoded sophisticated knowledge of stars, currents, and winds that allowed voyagers to cross vast oceans without modern instruments. These are survivors' legacies, ingenious methods of ensuring that even when writing failed, knowledge could endure. But perhaps the most haunting form of legacy is the fragments of advanced understanding embedded in myth. Many traditions speak of teachers, semi-divine figures, or wise sages who emerged after catastrophe to instruct humanity in farming, astronomy, medicine, and law. The Sumerians spoke of the Apkallu, fish-like beings who rose from the sea after the flood to teach civilization. The Mesoamericans spoke of Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent deity who gave humanity knowledge of calendars and agriculture. The Greeks remembered Prometheus, who defied the gods to give mankind fire and knowledge. Whether these figures were symbolic or real, they represent the same truth. Survivors passed down knowledge critical for rebuilding society, framing it in stories so it could endure the erosion of time. And yet, the survivor's legacy is bittersweet. For every piece of knowledge preserved, much more was lost. Imagine standing at the edge of a collapsed world, carrying fragments of books, scraps of memory, half-remembered methods of farming, building, or healing. Over time, what was once advanced knowledge becomes distorted, simplified, or encoded in ritual. What begins as astronomy may become astrology. What begins as medicine may become myth about healing spirits. The survivors tried, but their burden was too heavy to carry in full. Still, fragments survived, and those fragments are what we stumble upon today in ruins, myths, and traditions that feel strangely out of place in the narrative of human progress. The survivors also left us a deeper legacy: humility. Their stories remind us that no civilization, no matter how great, is immune to collapse. They tell us that pride comes before the fall, that arrogance invites destruction. This moral dimension is woven into nearly every myth of catastrophe. In the biblical flood, humanity's corruption and hubris invite divine wrath. In Greek myth, hubris against the gods often leads to destruction. In Hindu cycles, the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, ends when humanity forgets righteousness. These warnings are not just theological, they are survivors' attempts to encode lessons about balance, morality, and sustainability into cultural memory. Their legacy is not only technical, but ethical, a reminder that survival requires more than tools, it requires wisdom. Even our modern world carries echoes of their legacy, though often unrecognized. The very idea of archiving knowledge in libraries, of preserving seeds in vaults, of mapping the stars, all echo ancient practices. The survivors of past cataclysms understood the fragility of knowledge, and their instinct to preserve it is the same instinct that drives modern efforts to build doomsday vaults in places like Svalbard. We like to believe we are unique, but we are repeating their impulse to ensure that even if collapse comes, humanity will have a chance to rebuild. The survivor's legacy also challenges us with a haunting possibility that what we think of as myths about gods, heroes, and lost worlds are not fantasies but memories encoded in symbolic language. The gods who bring fire may be survivors who brought knowledge of metallurgy. The heroes who slayed monsters may be leaders who overcame real threats. The lost golden ages may be distorted memories of times when civilizations thrived with knowledge we no longer possess. To dismiss these as fantasy is to discard the very legacy the survivors risked everything to preserve. What is most remarkable is the resilience embedded in this legacy. Survivors, facing unimaginable trauma, did not give up. They chose to remember, to rebuild, to pass on. They became the seed of the future, ensuring that humanity would not vanish. And this resilience is their greatest gift to us. It whispers across time, telling us that even if collapse comes again, and history suggests it will, survival is possible. The survivor's legacy proves that humanity can endure, that even when worlds are lost, new ones can be born from their ashes. But their legacy also carries a challenge. Will we listen? Will we honor their warnings and prepare? Or will we repeat the arrogance of civilizations before us? Will we preserve our knowledge in ways that can outlast catastrophe? Or will we allow it to vanish into myth once more? The survivors gave us fragments, but it is up to us to assemble them, to recognize them for what they are, and to carry them forward into the uncertain future. Perhaps that is the final message of the survivor's legacy, that history does not belong only to the victors or the conquerors. It belongs to those who endure, who carry the torch through the darkness, who choose to remember when forgetting would be easier. Their legacy is ours now, and what we do with it will decide whether we too become mere echoes, or whether we become the civilization that finally learns to break the cycle. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. History is not a straight path, but a circle turning again and again, erasing civilizations while leaving behind only fragments of their greatness. The ruins, the myths, the strange artifacts, the half-remembered traditions, they are all reminders that we are not the first to stand at the height of power, knowledge, and ambition. Others came before us, built wonders we still struggle to understand, and then vanished into the shadows of time. Their voices may be faint, carried in whispers of legend and stone, but their message is clear. No civilization is eternal, and survival depends not on power alone, but on wisdom. Think of the survivors' stories. They endured floods, fire, famine, and darkness, yet they carried fragments of knowledge into the future. They gave us myths that doubled as warnings, monuments that served as calendars, and traditions that preserved practical wisdom in symbolic form. Their legacy is proof that even when worlds collapse, humanity can endure, but it is also a reminder that endurance comes at a cost. Whole libraries of knowledge can be lost, entire sciences erased, entire histories forgotten. The survivors could only pass down fragments, and it is up to us to recognize those fragments for what they are, clues left behind so we would not repeat the same mistakes. Yet here we are, standing in an age of technology and arrogance, believing that we are invincible, that the cycle no longer applies to us. We build higher towers, faster machines, and sprawling networks, but beneath it all our foundations are as fragile as any that came before. We depend on systems that can collapse with a single disruption, on resources that are finite, and on an environment already strained by our choices. The echoes of past civilizations warn us, yet we act as though their lessons do not matter. Perhaps that is the greatest danger, not the cycle itself, but our refusal to see it. And yet, the conclusion does not have to be despair. The legacy of those who endured teaches us that collapse is not the end of humanity, but a turning point. It is an opportunity to preserve knowledge, to rebuild with resilience, to carry forward the wisdom of those who came before. If we choose to listen to the echoes, if we learn from the survivors, if we honor the warnings etched into myth and stone, then perhaps we can finally break the cycle, or at the very least, we can ensure that when catastrophe comes, as history suggests it will, we are ready not only to endure, but to rise again stronger than before. The question is whether we will listen. Will we dismiss the survivor's legacy as nothing more than fantasy? Will we continue to build on arrogance until we crumble like every empire before us? Or will we take seriously the truth carved into the ruins, sung in ancient chants, whispered through countless generations, that survival is possible, but only if we are humble enough to learn? The choice is ours, but time is not infinite. The cycle is already turning, and what we do now will decide whether we are remembered as the civilization that finally endured, or the next legend of a world lost to time. So when you hear the old myths of floods and fire, when you see the monuments aligned with the stars, when you read of sages who brought knowledge after catastrophe, remember this: they are not just stories, they are voices across time, survivors speaking directly to us. They are saying, we were here, we faced what you will face. Learn, prepare, endure. Whether we choose to listen will determine if their legacy ends with us or lives on through us into the future.